So I would just like to welcome everybody to our Vanier Doctoral Candidate Graduate Scholarships Information Session. We appreciate your taking the time to join us today, and we hope that you gain lots of valuable information. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. I'd just like to take a couple of moments to go over a few housekeeping things before we get started. We are recording this presentation and it will be posted on the Graduate Studies website on the Vanier webpage. And a copy of these presentation slides will also be available to you to access. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom meeting. It will be monitored and you will be we'll show you whether it's going to be addressed within the presentation or if it's going to be answered live. All right. Excuse me, we'll get started. So this is just the start of the overview of the Vanier Scholarship. I'm not going to read into everything. It's, as I said, will all be presented to you. But the key thing to remember is that your Stage 1 Letter of Intent package will be due on September 8th, and all of the deadlines tied into this competition are firm deadlines. And this is just a quick overview of what our quotas are for this coming year. And then we've also included a list of quotas and results for the last 5 years. On average, we seem to receive between 4 to 6 Vaniers per year. Here are just a few more things about, top overviews. You don't have to be registered or admitted to a graduate program at your time of application. And just keep in mind that only if you're endorsed by your department, then you will be asked to submit a full application through ResearchNet. And I will now turn it over to Antonella.
Hi, everybody. I'm Antonella, also known as Tony, and I'm a Scholarships and Awards Officer at SGS. So I'll be talking about the Vanier eligibility. So for Vanier, you can be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or international student. This is the only tri-agency award that allows international students to apply. You require a first-class average in each of the last 2 years. That would be 2018 and 19 and 19 and 20. The first-class average is an A- or a 10. It used to be 11. This is revised now, so the average is lower. The next point is you need to be seeking financial support for your first PhD. So if you've done another PhD, you wouldn't be eligible. Also, if you currently hold a tri-agency doctoral award like a CIHR or NSERC or SSHRC doctoral, you're not eligible. Also, you need to be pursuing full-time doctoral studies either starting May 2021, September 2021, or January 2022. And most importantly, have completed no more than 20 months of doctoral studies as of May 1st, 2021. So basically started full-time doctoral studies no earlier than September 2019. For students who were direct entry into PhD from their undergrad or transferred from their master's to their PhD, the rules are slightly different. I suggest you go to the Vanier website to get complete details about that. Research respectively involving and engaging Indigenous communities is defined as research in any field or discipline that is conducted by First Nations, Inuit, Métis, or other Indigenous nations, communities, societies, or individuals, and or grounded in or engaged with one or more of these communities and or their wisdom, cultures, sorry, that's my phone, experiences or knowledge systems as expressed in their dynamic forms, past and present. And also, if your proposed research respectfully involved Indigenous communities, please include The research respectfully involves and engages Indigenous communities at the beginning of your lay abstract. So that's it for that. Equity, diversity, and inclusion. The Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarship Program strives to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout the application, review, and selection process. To better equip all those participating in the Vanier CGS competition, that would mean applicants, nominating institutions, referees, and reviewers, the tri-agencies have curated an important list of resources to help each group. So if you go on the Vanier website, there's resources for each group. So there'll be resources for applicants, host institutions, referees, and reviewers. We suggest anyone who wants to apply for a Vanier, go to the Vanier website and read the resources for the applicants, and also possibly also refer your referees to the same website as there's resources for them as well. And so basically the EDI page addresses the following topics: promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion, research respectfully involving and engaging Indigenous communities, and limiting unconscious bias. Thank you.
All right, the awkward pause. So I'm going to assume that, thanks, Diane. I'm going to assume that's where Dr. Carter and I come in. Thank you. I'm Dr. Brenda Verklian. I'm a professor in the School of Rehabilitation Science. So thanks for joining us today. I serve on the National Committee for CIHR Vanier Scholarships alongside the chair of that committee as well. Dr. Parminder Raina is actually also here at McMaster University, and he chairs the Vanier CIHR committee. So some of what I'm going to be talking about, my perspective, is really from sitting on that committee. Dr. Carter.
Hi, I'm Nancy Carter, and I'm the Assistant Dean of the Nursing Graduate Program, and I sit on the McMaster Vanier Committee and have for a number of years, and this is the committee which applications and the programs come up to this committee at McMaster and are reviewed, and some decisions are made at that level if they go up to the National Committee where Brenda sits. So we both bring perspective that way.
And then we're very fortunate to have student presenters here, our Vanier scholars, one from each agency. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to just briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, my name is Sarah Medeiros. I am a PhD student in the Medical Science Department in the Faculty of Health Science here at McMaster. I started my graduate studies in 2017 as a master's student and then transferred. So I am a 2020 CIHR Vanier Scholar this year.
Excellent. And Mustafa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Mustafa Naim. I'm doing my finishing up my second year of PhD in the Civil Engineering Department, and I am a recipient of the NSERC Vanier Scholar for the year 2020. And I'll be here to share my insight with you guys. If anyone have any questions for me, you can always just ask them. Thank you.
Great. And then Carlo, last but not least.
Hi everybody. Hi everybody who joined the meeting today. So my name is Carlo Hendy Charles. I'm a second year PhD student in sociology at McMaster, and this year I was honored to receive the Shirt Vanier for my research for the next 2 years. So you can imagine how happy I'm still am. So I'm happy to share all my insight and everything that I've done through the application process with you, and I'm happy to respond to your all questions. Please ask any questions that you want. Nothing is stupid enough to be responded. Thank you.
Excellent. So what we're going to do, like the next few slides, and I get to, well, we're kind of off. I'm having a little bit of feedback, Mustafa. Can you just mute your line, I think?
Yeah, I just do that.
Thanks. It's always not very enjoyable to hear oneself, as we know, but all that to say, over the next few slides, what we're going to do is kind of talk about the Vanier in general, and then we're going to talk more about tips. And so we're going to try to complement what's on the slides as opposed to reading from the slides. But we'll do our best. So I get to boss Diane around a little bit, Nancy and I do, around telling her to move to the next slide. And then of course I have multiple screens open. So yeah, so what we want to talk about, as you already know from looking at the Vanier Scholarship, that there's really three major areas: academic excellence, research potential, and leadership. And so we're just going to talk about the criteria really briefly for each of those. And then, as I said, we're going to get into the tips. But if you can go to the next slide. Diane, thanks. So academic excellence, not surprisingly, it is really important. And the Vanier, when you go and Google it and look it up, we all know that the word exceptional is used quite often. But one thing I appreciate about the committee, even at the CIHR level, is that academic excellence can be shown in a number of ways. Boy, do we do look at people's transcripts at the national level, and do we look to see? I think one of the big things is, I mean, yes, people come in and they're very smart. Let's just say that, but there's also, we look for a trajectory of excellence as well. And so, you know, do sometimes people have a story to tell, because everybody has a story, and that's what you're going to be trying to share through the Vanier. But it's not just your personal story, right? It's a professional story. It's a story of you becoming a scientist in your respective discipline and demonstrating excellence in those areas, but also leadership in the community, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the academic excellence part, certainly we are interested in, I say interested, we are looking at your grades, but also some awards and distinctions. And I think that's an important thing to showcase as well. And we know that sometimes the awards aren't always monetary per se. Of course, the Banting and some of those other awards that are available, you know, at the CIHR level, the master's level. I'm not sure, Sarah, whether you had one of those, or Mustafa or Carlo, but we'll talk about those in a moment. But all that to say that you want to show from undergraduate, those count too. I'm not saying you go back into high school. I mean, that's a very different academic environment, but I'm not going to exclude that either, because there are sometimes distinctions that you receive from your community that demonstrate academic excellence. But this notion of exceptionality is key. And then, of course, we will talk about referees in a moment and making careful selection of those a little bit further down the line. But academic excellence should be part of that assessment. So Diane, next slide. Research potential is the next major category. And again, we're going to talk about tips in each of these areas, but I just wanted to also highlight that that this is meant to be, you are, you know, doing a PhD, doing doctoral work. So the notion of research is an important aspect to show. And of course, CIHR has distinct research elements, SSHRC and NSERC. So you want to make sure, you know, the agency that you're targeting, of course, and your supervisor is usually under that respective realm. But we know that research potential, much like academic excellence, can be shown in different ways. Have we counted people's journal articles, and has that come into their publications, their scholarly presentations? Does that come up for discussion? It sure does at that national level. So we have some examples here of research excellence. So participating, yes, in your university, you know, research colloquiums is important, but also, you know, the opportunity to present, you know, nationally, internationally is important as well. So for those listening on the line who may be, you know, thinking about building their CV, I think it's just as important to be thinking about this in the year ahead, because then you may be able to apply, right, Diane and Tony, if you're eligible for a Vanier scholarship. But people can make the most of their first year in university. So as I said, the contribution to research is important. That's great, Diane. I'm going on, you're right. Leadership is a really important element. And what's interesting about leadership is that it is, and I found our committee at the CIHR level, and Nancy's gonna talk as well a little bit more about leadership, but and I'm pretty sure, or Nancy, is this your slide? No, I'm still talking. Leadership is still, is about, you know, are you extending yourself beyond, that's what I'll call it, beyond what we would usually expect. So people will say, oh, you know, I mentored, you know, an undergraduate in the lab. Well, sorry to say, that's an expected element. That's not leadership per se, or I was a TA. Again, those would be more traditional or expected. And I bet Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa probably have some examples of leadership that fit these criteria. But it doesn't always have to be in your field of study either, but definitely this notion of in the community was much of the discussion in our CIHR committee, the notion of how people are contributing, I want to say, to the social and economic fabric of their community in some ways, but it is about leveraging those and then those accomplishments. So you'll see that, but we'll talk a little bit more about leadership if you go to the next slide. So and I think, Nancy, you talk about this too, around this like leadership versus volunteering versus extracurricular activity. So it's one thing to be involved and, to be part of the team, but it's another thing to lead the team. And I think that's what the scholarship is really looking at, is leading the team. But of course, part of leadership can be that you were mentored into that role, that you've contributed in terms of sustaining involvement in that organization. That's an important thing to show as well. So I think this leadership aspect is something that's very, very, that sometimes separates applicants and seems to be one that's really important at that national committee stage. And if you go to the next slide, I think this is where Nancy gives some good examples.
So sometimes students will ask, what are some examples of leadership that I can include in my application? So you may be involved if there's a scientific meeting, or, well, there may not be this year, but in the past, organization or meetings, maybe virtual meetings that are happening within your lab or within a larger program. You can put down university committees. Perhaps you've been invited to do some talks. Perhaps there's some KT exercises. You've taken a leadership role in some KT strategies around your interest, awards and scholarships, volunteerism that perhaps have led to something, things like patents, etc. Often it is the leadership activities that are associated with your research idea that really come across strongly. So, for instance, we've had a past winner who her research was all about care for elderly people in the community with mental health issues. And she did a lot of leadership activities that were associated with that. So it meant for a strong application. You can go to the next slide. Just some more example of things that you're doing. So any assessment review activities, development perhaps of courses and programs. So Brenda mentioned, we would expect PhD students to be a TA and do some teaching, but perhaps you're more involved in curriculum development in your program or revisions of courses, and then extra supervisory type activity that you might be doing. Okay, you can go to the next one. So I think at this point, we'll talk about putting together the application, and perhaps I'm not sure if we want to get some tips at this point, Brenda, from the students, or if you want to share, should you and I perhaps share some tips?
I think what's going to happen, right? So now what we're going to do is kind of go through each one of these a little bit, and then turn to Carlo, Sarah, and Mustafa, right, to say, what did you guys do? And we talked a little bit, Nancy, just before you were able to join us, about people kind of building off each other. So yes, of course, we used to do this, or we did this last year in person. So just bear with us a little bit. Sometimes we may have to interrupt each other too, which is important on Zoom. So we've given each other permission to do that as well. As you can see, Nancy and I sometimes doing that a little bit right now. But I think the key that we just want to say, that's why it's in the box there, is you really, and I saw this on my CIHR committee and Nancy as well, and we also said not emphatically. Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa won't know this behind the scenes, but boy, people come from really diverse backgrounds in terms of research excellence that are on the committee. So how you write in an accessible, which means in this case understandable and meaningful and impactful would be another word I would use. is really important. So you can imagine having people review your application who may be outside your field. If possible, those kinds of things can be important. So if we just go to the next slide, Diane. So I think we're going to talk about each, as I said, now that you have an overview of what each section was, and we were already giving some ideas and some things, right, during that just overview, but this idea of the research proposal and making sure that, again, that non-specialist audience, avoiding jargon, graphs, images, okay, like got to be mindful, right? Because space is an issue on these applications. And what we sometimes see is people trying to jam in so much that you actually putting a space between paragraphs can be important, right? So still the setup and organization, subheadings, all these lovely things that you've probably seen from your supervisor and other colleagues and peers is important. So we do look at the research, and there are people outside your field that will, you know, try to question and say, are these methods good? Usually there's other people that can contribute. We can see everybody's applications when we're on, even though there's some that are assigned to us as like we're the primary reviewer, for example, or discussant, but other people can contribute. Parminder will ask questions as the chair of the CIHR committee, the Vanier Scholarship. So all of that to say you want to use your full pages, your 2 full pages. And Sarah, I wonder if you have any comments about your experience with this.
Yeah, I can give you some helpful tips, at least from my perspective. I thought this was probably the easiest to write just because we're all pretty familiar with our research projects, but what was difficult was being able to fit it in the 2 pages and being able to avoid the jargon. The way that I really helped break it down was to kind of break it down into headings. And one of the major things that I realized from Vanier is to always show the impact of your work. So I had an intro and I had 2 aims, and under each aim I had a larger paragraph that kind of said the significance of my work and how it's going to affect my community, how it's going to affect my research field, and how it's going to develop me as a person as well. So that's kind of my 2 cents. And as Brenda said, space is an issue, so just try to be as clear and concise as possible.
Yeah. Carlo, I don't know if you want to add from a SSHRC perspective here.
Yes, I completely concur with Sarah's point about space and headlines. That's exactly what I did too. I think that made it easier because you only have 2 pages, and honestly, there is so much that you want to say, and you just don't have the space for it. And I remember my first application was so jam-packed. I had to basically reduce, you know, the font to get it to 10, and it was like so difficult to read. So I had to redo it several times. So I think in terms of advice, what I would recommend is to write your application like you're talking to your little brother or your little sister or somebody who is outside of academia. Especially in the SSHRC portion of it. In the social sciences, we have a lot of very abstract concepts to talk about simple things. And for people who are in the social sciences and humanities, it's quite easy because you hear this particular concept, you know what it means, right? But for people who are not in it, and you know, we have to be mindful that the selection committee is comprised of people who are from different disciplines. So what I did was to just take away all the very technical, jargonistic, sociological language, and I use it with some kind of plain language. And I think that was very, very useful. So after doing that, I pass it to some people who are like doing the undergraduate studies, or my little brother who is, who is in high school, and I ask him, okay, read this and let me know what you think. What do you understand? And then I remember the first responses were, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I had to redo it several times until I make sure that people really understand in a very simple way the message. So that's one way. And in terms of organization of the content, because you don't have enough time in order to attract people's attention, what I did was to kind of put certain concepts that I think that are very important in bold fonts. So for example, if I'm talking about a specific concept, so I put it in bold so people can see, okay, this is something probably important, or I put it in italic, right? So that people can go back to it and then remember it. And then it kind of breaks down the entire very, sample structure of the writing. So those are the things I think we can do to make your application stand out, because obviously people who apply for Vanier, they are excellent. And there are some people who have been out of university for many years, who have worked in very important areas, so who have a lot of experiences. So you want to make sure that the time that the reader is gonna spend reading your application, at least they remember it. So that's my approach.
Thanks, Carlo. And then Mustafa for the NSERC.
They said most of the things that we've done.
Yeah.
However, I did one thing differently. So in engineering, we have a lot of terms that are not equivalent to anything in plain language. So what I would do at first was I would define concepts that I would have no other way to express later on in the proposal. And what I did differently was that I divided my proposal into sections, and each section's heading was a question. So I've spent a lot of time reading what they're actually looking for when they're reading the research proposal, what the reviewers are trying to find, what their eyes are going to look for. So that's how I structured my proposal by, for example, the heading of each paragraph would be a question. So in this paragraph, I'm going to answer the question of how I'm going to do what I'm doing. The other paragraph, other section is going to be why am I doing what I'm doing. That way, it was very easy to follow. It also took about 15 to 20 rounds of review with my supervisor in order to get that combination in a correct manner. And I think it made a difference in the final product that I had to send to the competition.
Yeah, I think Nancy, probably you can speak from some things that you heard on the review committee at the university level and what these guys have said, probably just reiterate, right?
Absolutely. So it's exactly what they've said. And for the students who do go forward from the university, there's a great process where the committee members will work with students to strengthen their proposal before it goes up. But one of the big things is about proposals are too dense, too jargony, not enough white space. We're reading 10, 20, 30 of these. I mean, I'm in FHS, but I don't know the jargon in different programs other than the program I'm in. So clarity, succinctness, simplicity can be very good.
Yep. So you can see, just listening, right, that there is like this still lovely flexibility, right? So they give you the page count or the character count, but there still is flexibility in terms of how you end up setting up your research proposal for understandability and impactfulness. So Diane, can you go to the next slide? I think Nancy's going to talk now about that personal leadership.
Sure. So the leadership statement is difficult for students and probably what they get the most feedback on. It needs to be clear again and concise. Please look at the website carefully to make sure you're following the instructions. You need to use strong words, you need to be succinct and concise, and we encourage you to not use an autobiographical approach. This is not to say, and Brenda says this nicely, we do want to know your story as a researcher and what you're going to do and how you've gotten to your place, but this isn't a life story about, for instance, ever since I was a young child, I wanted to do, when I fell off my bike, I decided I wanted to do orthopedic surgery research. And then I went to grade school and then I went to high school, etc. Instead, really it's your story, but really getting at your strengths, I would say first, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So it needs to be engaging, be deliberate about describing activities in which you participated and how it supports your future leadership in your research area. So this is about, I'm a leader, I'm a future leader in my area of research, and these are some of the things I've done to get there. So if you can go to the next slide, please. It should be compelling, and maybe a way for you to start to do this, to think about your leadership, get yourself a list together of the activities you've participated in. Maybe pick, highlight the ones that are really related to your research. Start by writing about them for maximum impact, and then perhaps some other things. And talk about how does what you've done as a volunteer, as a leader, connect you with a future leader in your area of research. So for instance, if you've, perhaps been in a student organization or you've helped organize a conference, you can talk about how organizational skills are so important as a researcher in organizing conferences. Tie it to what you're going to be doing in the future to, get at that impact. And again, always trying to link it to your specific research area if you can. So I don't know if maybe the students want to talk a bit about their leadership statements or their experience writing their statements now.
Yeah, I can go. Just give me one second. Can somebody else go? I have an emergency quickly.
Yeah.
I have to
Sarah,
attend
do you want to start?
Absolutely, I can start. So this was probably the most difficult statement for me to write because you start to feel really full of yourself when you write it. And if you start to feel full of yourself, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
The way that I thought of this was why I should be recognized as a leader in Canada. So again, one of my major things that I'm going to highlight that would benefit you as an applicant is to break everything down into headings. So I'm going to tell you what my headings were, and that would definitely help you organize it. So my headings were divided into research leadership, academic leadership, communications and collaborations, and my contribution to communities. So one of the things that is very common is just to state my CV. And I think the original feedback from the school was that it was very poorly written. So I think I rewrote this 10 or 15 times. And I ended up finding the best way to think about it is don't just state your CV, state the significance of each of your activities to your personal journey as a scientist, researcher, or student, and how that affects everyone else. So how is this significant to my lab? How is this significant to my field of study? And how is this significant to my community? I found also improving the tone using, I did this activity to hope to achieve skills such as this, which will help develop so and so and so. Basically, the other best advice that I can give you is I ended up going onto the Vanier leadership or the Vanier website, and they actually have a definition of what leadership, academic excellence, and research potential actually are. So if you use that evaluation criteria, you'll understand what
for the French part. I will be speaking French for the.
They will tell you what keywords to add to the document, and that'll help. Sorry, what happened there?
Diane might have muted you by accident.
Oh, that's okay. But I guess just go onto the Vanier website, use those keywords, and that'll help you write your leadership statement.
Yeah, and I think there was a comment. I'm trying to keep an eye on the Q&A as well, and thanks to Diane and Tony for answering lots and lots of questions there that are coming up. But one thing I do want to say is there was just a comment about, how do you weave in work experience? And I will say at a CIHR level, not to say that work experience doesn't count, but boy, we were still looking for, if somebody was publishing or showing leadership at work, is that sort of expected as part of the position? And so how do you still tell that story, right, in a way that it doesn't just, it shows again that notion of exceptionality as opposed to expected. And we are interpreting, right? We don't have you in the room to explain to us what's happened. So there is sometimes a debate that can happen between people based on what's written. And people arguing, actually, this is what somebody was doing and it's paid employment. It's not leadership, right? And that can be in any of the sections as well. And I think with Nancy's opportunity is a little bit different, right? At her level, as you heard, is they can help shape, right? And come back to the applicant to say, actually, this is unclear to us. But at that national level, we don't, right? We don't go back. So that's just something to add.
So if there is something that you're doing at work that is above and beyond, so if you are working, as a health provider and you take, you have an interest in something and develop national guidelines that you try to get up as uptake, that's above and beyond what you probably would do in your day-to-day work. So just articulate that. Talk, what is the impact of your contribution to this new national guideline? How will it help patients and families, et cetera?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, Sarah, if you have anything to add or if we want to give Mustafa a chance.
I think you guys kind of hit everything, so I'll give Mustafa a chance to add on.
Great.
Thank you. Well, I'll have to share my story at this particular section of the application because my story is a little bit different. So looking at the criteria that they assess the Venue application, they have 3 sections, like you all know: the academic excellence, the research potential, and the leadership statement. Before writing the application, I tried to evaluate myself in all of these 3 sections, and I found out that my leadership statement would be the most reliable section in my application in a way. First of all, like, all the applicants have academic excellence, all the applicants' grades are good, so I cannot be like overly exceptional at that part. The research potential at the time of the application, I had a very good proposal, but I did not have any publications. I only had 1 submitted paper, 1 conference presentation, and 1 conference paper. So I knew that I can't heavily rely on that section of the application to assess myself. So I poured all my time and energy into the leadership statement, which I have to be completely honest, was the hardest part to write. Like Sarah said, it's you get a little bit full of yourself once you start writing it. So my leadership experience started way back when I included everything. I included when I was in school and I was in the Students' Union. I included when I was the leader of the Marine Boy Scouts when I was 10 or 11 years old. And then during my undergrad years, I co-founded a student activity at my university. I graduated from Cairo University in Egypt. So I co-founded the TEDx Cairo University, the chapter of my university. And it took us a lot of years to get that up and running. And I was the license holder and the leader throughout most of this process. So what I had to do was I had to translate all my experiences into impacts on the community and into the organization. So for example, when I say I was the head of marketing for 1 year, I had to state what my actions or decisions changed for the marketing department for that year. When I say I was the leader of this organization for a number of months, I have to say what my leadership impacted on that organization, how it changed, how it shaped the organization moving forward. And I also had to relate all these experiences to what I used to do academically at the time. So I did that during my undergrad. At the same time, I was leading a few groups into our graduation project. So I had to relate all of these things together. During my master's, when I was finishing my master's, I used to mentor some of the student activities like heads or some of the extracurricular communities. I also volunteered in some startups as a consultant at the time. I used to include that as well throughout the journey and translate it into getting always like a bigger challenge throughout each phase. And then at the end of the application, I would say how all these leadership activities shaped what I'm doing in the PhD and the research that I'm doing and the problems that I'm trying to tackle in the PhD. So I believe that the leadership statement is it's the longest thing that you should put in time and effort to write. And yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Carlo, yeah, please.
Yes, finally. Sorry for earlier. I had to really manage a very complicated call. I completely agree with Mustafa and Sarah. I don't think I'm going to add too much. I think they have said it all. So I'm going to talk for the sake of international students specifically. I've seen one question from an international student: are they eligible to apply as a second-year international student? The average, I guess the answer is yes, according to the presentation. But for the sake of international students, I came to Canada 4 years ago after doing my first master's in France, and I did my undergraduate studies in France, and afterwards I lived in South America for a few years, and I lived in the Caribbean. So I've had experiences in different countries and doing different things. So it was very difficult for me, as Mustafa was saying, to know what to include in the leadership statement and how to include it. So that was I think that took me so much time to just figure out how to do it, how to write every one of my experiences, because sometimes certain things that can be seen as a leadership experience in other context, in the Canadian context, sometimes I'm wondering whether that's really leadership. So I had to consult with a lot of people, with my supervisors, with previous Vanier scholars about what leadership statement is from their perspective, to see how I can actually explain mine. So I think that's something that I really recommend to people. If you have people in your department who have had the Vanier scholarship before, and then you can be in touch with them, really do that, because I think that's going to give you so much clarity about it. So how I approach it finally, after receiving comments from the committee, I don't know if Nancy Carter was part of people who wrote the comments. I remember one of the comments that I received was, Carlo, your statement is beautifully written, but it's too literary. It's too autobiographical. So I had to go back and say, but how? I'm talking about my life, so how should I talk about it? So I think it's, you have a better decision to make. So finally what I did was to divide my statement in two parts, one which is an academic part, and then one which is a non-academic part. So I explain all my leadership experiences in the academia through my publications, the special issue that I co-edited, all the academic things that I've done, organizing conferences, all of those things. I put them in one, and plus all the scholarships that I've received. And I said, those experiences kind of exemplify the type of academic excellence that I have, but also the type of leadership I've had in my own field. And then I have another part of my statement that was about my non-academic experiences in terms of leadership. So, so what I did in order to avoid the autobiographical aspect of it, because it's so easy to get, to do that from since you're a kid to now. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm gonna find out common themes among my leadership experience. So if there is one theme about, let's say, management of group, for example, how you lead group, how you organize things. So I'm gonna put all the experiences that I've had managing a particular group or several groups in one paragraph. And then the second paragraph is gonna be about other aspects of leadership. I don't know, vision, for example, like if I founded my own theater company when I was 14, and that required some type of vision to be able to continue that, and then to, to keep it up and running for a few years. So I put all of those experiences in one team. So I kind of broke it down that way. It made it way easier afterwards to avoid, the autobiographical aspect of it, because it's very easy to fall into that, and also to make it much more interesting. So people can read one theme and say, okay, what you say is backed up by your Canadian Common CV, because obviously you have to make sure that the things that you say in the leadership statement, they're also in your Canadian Common CV. So when you can write one sentence, for example, yes, I don't know, one sentence, I participated in a very interesting study in the UK about gender and migration, but people should be able to go to your Common CV and see the details of that experience, right? So you don't have to put everything in that leadership statement, because you have the statement there.
Yeah, Carlo, I think that's a really good point, because I think somebody had asked, like, what's it, like, official evidence? I'm not exactly sure what they meant by official evidence, but the next section we are going to talk a little bit about the CV. But I think you're absolutely right. This notion of, now you need to, provide specific enough that the light bulb goes on, because we do look at the CV quite closely. But so you need to provide enough in that written statement. I'm going to see that connection, but nonetheless, so this notion of, you should name it, like the organization, like if you founded the theater company, say the name of the theater company that you founded, right? And then you're gonna put that on the CV part as an example.
And I think similar to the research proposal, your leadership statement, have headings, make it easy for the readers to read, some white space, not just one big long story, but both, I think all the students so far have talked about, they've clumped things into some sort of structure and then tie it all together to help, why you're going to be a leader in your chosen field and how they relate.
That's right. Sarah, after the other two have provided there, any other things you wanted to add to what Carlo and Mustafa said? I don't know. Just giving you an opportunity here.
Honestly, they've done a really good job explaining it, but as you can see, like they're exceptional students. Everyone, like there's going to be a lot of exceptional students, but don't be discouraged that you didn't start your own company because I didn't, or don't be discouraged that and you feel like you shouldn't be applying for this, because I felt that way as well. I felt like, why am I going to apply to this? I don't think I'll get it. Like I don't have 1,000 publications, but I have 2. So this leadership statement is not just a way to say, look, I've done all these crazy things. It's a way to say, look, I've done some things. This is how I'm a leader. This is the skills I'm getting from it. And this is why I'm going to have the potential to be a leader in my field. And this is why I really deserve this award. So that's probably my best advice, because I know that it's kind of scary to do this application. It takes a lot of time and effort. And sometimes you ask yourself why you even apply. And I've seen other students.
Sarah.
Yeah.
I know a lot of students feel that way. So apply.
Absolutely.
You don't realize how much of a difference you actually make, and you are a leader.
Yeah, no, I think that's I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think it's about how, it's not what, it's about how you shape your story and tell and talk about your accomplishments. And so I think that is really important. So I think the other thing, when you apply for a scholarship like this, and this didn't exist back in my day, but I think what happens when you apply for any scholarship, and I know Carlo, Mustafa, and Sarah didn't put all their eggs in one basket, but every time you end up discovering something else about yourself, like putting an application like this together really pays off. Because you get to know yourself really well, I guess, in some ways, and then it positions you well maybe for another application. So I think this is a unique one because it covers all 3 elements and makes you think about it.
Yeah, if I may add something about what Sarah just said. I remember last year I attended Vani, and also like a workshop or an introduction to the process before we decided to apply. And I had 2 people with me at the time, 2 colleagues, students with me. I think one of the panelists, I can't remember exactly who said something about having a large number of publications, a lot of journal papers before the application process, and that it's very important to show this kind of taking initiative and excellence in research. Those 2 people left. They did not continue the workshop, and they did not apply for the application. They were discouraged at the time. Like I said, I decided to weigh in more on the fields where I knew I had more strengths than the research potential part. And that's how, for example, in my score section, I got an 8.5 in the leadership statement, which, as I've heard from a lot of people, is actually higher than what other candidates might have gotten at the time. So not to be discouraged, like Sarah said, and the fact that the process itself teaches you a lot of things. Like I did the process while going through part B of my comprehensive examination for the PhD. They were at the same week probably, and doing this application actually helped me write a better proposal for my comprehensive part B exam. The feedback I got from the first and second stages of the process gave me a little bit of insights of what questions I should be asking when writing a research proposal. So it's a very good process to go through. Even if you know that your chances are low, I would also always encourage you to apply for it and get the experience out of it.
Yeah. And can I really add for 1 minute? I think the idea is not necessarily on what you have done, as Sarah said, it is how you frame what you have done, and then everybody who is applying has different strengths, right? Some people are going to be very good in a particular criteria, for example, criterion. In the case of academic excellence, some people are going to have a 9, for example, or 8, or something like this, and they're going to have 7 in the other criteria. So I think the most important thing is to know your strength better and play that strength. So I think that's the main message. You might think that what you have done is not necessarily impactful, it's not great and all of that, but really put it on paper and relate it to your own research, relate it to your own vision, and relate it to what you want to do in the future. You would see how impactful it is, because everything that we have learned somehow in life contributes to what we become today. So I think it's really important to not dismiss in terms of only the big stuff that normally are celebrated as as excellent or whatever, but really thinking to, okay, I've done, for example, this small thing, working with this organization as a volunteer, and I led this particular group of 3 volunteers, for example, and how does that translate into an impactful action for that organization, for that community, but also how does that allow me to better understand my own PhD research and my own trajectory as a person. So I think if you can really respond to those questions for each one of your experiences, you should not be worried too much about whether you have the most fabulous leadership experience.
Yeah, and I think we're going to come back a little bit at the end where you're kind of weaving things together, but we're going to talk about the CCV next. And so I don't know if there's a few slides about tips for leadership, but Diane and Tony are going to circulate or have the presentation fully available, but we've definitely covered each one of these bullets. And lots of good information. So the CCV, there was a question about, second authorship. And so this is where in the CCV, you are going to list the different aspects of your, right? Like that, and I'm going to call evidence of accomplishment, but you are going to list your evidence of accomplishment, right? In the CCV. And that's, and we know that it is structured in a way that, for everyone. Hence the term common in CCV, that your common CV, that everybody has the same kind of headings, but what you put under there is important. So it will be obvious to me as somebody, if I'm assigned your application or looking at your application, I will know that you're second author on this many papers, or third author, or that you contributed, or how many scholarly presentations you have, those kinds of things. So you are going to want to include that on your CCV, but there is opportunities, right, to talk about knowledge translation activities, and Nancy can maybe talk a little bit, right, because there's some headings there that offer some flexibility about how you're sharing information in the community, or different roles that you've had that may be beyond work, and maybe more on that volunteer capacity. But yeah, you want to make sure your journals and articles are up to date. Have I heard of reviewers going to look at the actual article? I sure have. So people actually going to look and see the article, the full article, right? And look at your accomplishments and what you've done. Have I ever Googled an applicant just to see what comes up? I have, right? When they talk about, let's say that they've done some work in the theater, or founded like a circus company for kids in the community with disabilities. Have I gone to look to see what that presence is? Sure, I have, right? And does that end up informing? Does it become part of my information that I have around evaluation? Yeah, it sure does. So I think it's just interesting to think about the information that you put on your CCV, how a potential reviewer can consider that information. And next slide. I think here we just talk about, the knowledge translation piece, the journals, publications, proceedings. And I think sometimes seeing another peer or your supervisor's CV, sure, that's intimidating. I don't really like that word, or overwhelming. Those kind of words never make us feel good when we say them. But I think what you want to do is knowledge is power here. So be able to see that CCV, see where they're putting different things, can really help you understand what, and get you to reflect on maybe some things you hadn't thought about putting on your, or where to put it on your CCV. I think there's one more slide. Again, yep. So I will say that, does it get into counting? That's the easiest thing, right, to do, is to get into a counting game with journal articles, and right, when people are on that threshold of getting the scholarship or not. So a lot of the higher ranked people on the CIHR will probably have at least, so Sarah had 2 publications, she said. Now, there are things that are higher impact factor, those kind of things, right? People will put in process sometimes. I don't count those. I'm not, actually, those are not. In fact, I'm wary when somebody starts to list all the things that they have in process. I just, those are not finished. And it kind of makes me question a little bit of what you think is finished, right? Like, I just don't know what that means. So I kind of end up discounting it. Of course, we know that there's differences across across applicants. We also have conversations about international applicants. They're seen very and viewed very differently. And I think given some of the circumstances around equity, diversity, and inclusion, we were having those conversations last year already about at a CIHR level on how things were falling out in that regard. So I think equity, diversity, and inclusion, in all fairness, needs to be considered here across candidates. And I'm really glad that that's being, you know, brought to the forefront now, and that Diane and Tony included that in the first few slides, because I think, again, we all have a story, but we know that story is very different for the Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I think, you know, that it's I'm going to say the process has not been fair because of systemic issues. And I think these also exist, let's be frank, in the CIHR institutions, in these federal institutions. The door is open, and so we must address those. And I know that our CIHR committee will be doing that. So I think, you know, thinking about the strength of your CCV, it's going to be wonderful now to hear from our students about how they positioned. You've heard Mustafa already refer a little bit to, you know, leadership became his focus and how to tell that story. But maybe Carlo, you can start with your experience from SSHRC.
Yes, for the CCV, yeah, it's it takes a lot of time. This is the first thing I'm gonna say. It takes a lot of time. So if you're planning on applying for September, you really have to start working on it right now. I really recommend that because of the structure, the structure of the Canadian Common CV itself, the way that it's you know, all the things that you have to fill out, and sometimes you know, the fonts, they're so small, so you don't really see errors. So you really need to go and read them several times to make sure that all the mistakes they're gone. So in terms of how I approached it, I just followed the structure. So whatever they ask me for the structure, if I have evidence, I can prove it, I proved it. And one of the things that I did in my application, everything that I've done, which is public, I provide a link in my application. So people can just click on the link, the reviewers, and they can see what I've done. So it's a link to, for example, videos on YouTube, or to my applications, for example, which is a required thing to do, or a link to anything that I've done that is available on the internet. I just provide that link because I think that for me, it's a way to, especially as an international applicant, where a lot of the things that I've done, they have been outside of Canada. So people don't necessarily know what they are, what they mean, and all of that. So I really make sure that I did that. And also, I would really recommend, you know, asking for advice. As Mustafa said, he worked with his application with his supervisor. I did the same, and I worked with mostly all sociology professors in my department. I just sent my application to all of them. So each one, you know, gave me some feedback and so I really recommend doing that. And if you have a good friend who really has time, because the CCV can be quite long and tedious to do, so you pass it on that person and you ask the person for honest feedback. For example, the way that you describe a particular section, does it make sense? So is it exactly what you want to say? Is it clear enough? Is the language plain enough, right? Those are the things that I would recommend.
Thanks, Carlo. Mustafa?
Yeah, well, I think Carlo said most of the things that we've done. It really does take a lot of time. That's something we all have to agree on. One of the things that I did to highlight some of the things that I used to do. So for example, in my leadership statement, I stated that I did some TV interviews or radio interviews during the time where I was doing something, but I didn't list them. Well, in the common CV, that you actually have to list them and provide like which channel, at what time, what's the name of the program. That's what I did, at least. Whether it was a radio interview or a televised interview or whatever, you just have to list them and like say why were you the person chosen for that interview and so forth. Also, I did something very similar to what Carlos did. I provided hyperlinks in my leadership statements to things that I did. So for example, when I said I was the license holder for TEDx Canadian University, that sentence was hyperlinked to my TED profile that states that I am the license holder, for example, for from the years 2015 to 2018. When I did something where I gave a talk in front of 300 people at this institute at that time, I would provide a link to the events. If I have a link to the events page, so that the reviewers would be, I don't know if they actually found these things, or if they had a printed paper, that would be completely useless. But I did it nonetheless, because I just didn't know how else to provide proof of the things that I've done, other than stating them in the Canadian Commons CV later on. That was a very important part to say.
We haven't had, I don't know, Nancy, there are still people that like to print things, but I will say that to all the people on my committee, it was all laptops. So those kind of links would work, but there are people around that still like to print things. So that is right. So do you also put the www, right, in case somebody wants to do it? That's a whole, but sometimes you don't have.
Yeah, but it took space that I didn't want to waste at that. So I only provided one www link at one point, but the rest were all hyperlinks, because I wanted to use all that space, trying to, even if not for words, just to give a white space in the page. It would be more beneficial.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we make choices for sure. Sarah?
I think Carlos and Mustafa did a really good job explaining everything. The only thing that I have to add is that when you do your CCV, you actually have to explain every single, like there's a little white box where you have to talk about what you did for each event. So there's a lot of writing behind it. So really give yourself a lot of time. It takes a lot. And I agree with Mustafa, where use your CCV as to state what you've done. So say I started an initiative to redo the social media platform for this and this. You can add the links to whatever, but then make sure that you do follow it up in your leadership statement, where you say, look, this is my activity and this is the impact it had and how it contributed to my success as a student and why I'm a leader today. So other than that, that's kind of all that I had. And just remember that this is all about leadership. So try to relate it always back to leadership in some way or another.
Yep. So Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa, you're able to put the fact that you help with this event on your CCV now, right? Because that's also something that you can, right? And I put it on my, now that I'll let you know on a secret, that usually at the faculty level, we have help with our CCVs from people that can get around, but at your level, certainly it's probably you inputting all of that. There was just a question about the Canadian Commons CV, Mustafa, and where do you insert links? And I think your point was you can insert links just about anywhere. But I think on your leadership statement, you had some, is that where you put the links, or?
Yeah, if I didn't provide so many links in the Canadian Commons CV in the detailed section. For example, there was no, like when I say that I was the head of this organization from this year to this year, for example, there is no place to insert a link in the Canadian Commons CV. You just have to start explaining what you were doing. Like Sarah said, there's a box that you can start talking about it. Of course, you can provide links there, but I thought in the Canadian Commons CV, I know people would spend more time reading the headlines, knowing exactly what you did, reading maybe a few lines of like, what does that mean, if they don't know what this role means that you said in the Canadian Commons CV, but they would put more effort in reading into the leadership statement. So I also try to put myself in the reviewer's mind and put in the links in the places where I know that would be more impactful. So I certainly provided more links in the leadership statement than the Canadian Commons CV.
If I may add, I did provide links in my Canadian Commons CV, especially in the section about publications. They ask you to provide links for those, and then so you can just click. For example, one, it turns, I think the font color turns into blue, and so they can just click on it, and then it opens the publication directly. So I did that for my application last year. And also, I agree with Mustafa, you don't have enough space, but whenever I feel like I need to put a link, so what I did, there are two different boxes in all the sections. So there is a box where you put the title of the activity that you have done. For example, I don't know, I've managed blah, 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 and there's a title. So if there is a space, what I did, I put my link directly in the title. So I still have space afterwards to explain what I have to explain about what I did. So this is one way I strategize in order to maximize space and not to just, let the length take all the space in my explanation. So yeah, that's what I did.
Okay, and I think Nancy, we're going to talk about referees next, but what was I going to say? There was just a question about explain the impact of research or contribution in the leadership statement, but we'll just hold that question still a little bit because we'll be able to have, I think we're going to have a little bit of time for some open dialogue just about the Vanier overall, but we do want to get to the referees.
Okay, can you move the slides forward? Thank you. And another one. And another one. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have referee assessments. There are your referee assessments are related to the research proposal, and then you also have leadership reference letters. So your leadership, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. Oh, one more. Your leadership reference letters, there's 2 of them that are required, and they should ideally be written by someone who knows you in a non-academic capacity if possible. Can talk about your capacity as a leader and relate it again. Sarah said it a couple times, relating it to the leadership evaluation criteria. And you probably want to share your leadership statement with them before they write it. And they should be referencing your life and research trajectory and providing some sort of assessment of your demonstrated and potential leadership abilities. So you might have worked in done a volunteer work in an organization, and so one of your reference letters might be from someone from that organization, from someone outside. So those are the leadership reference letters. Now, just going back to the referees, and Brenda, do you want to talk a bit about the referee assessment, which is different than the leadership reference letters?
So I think, and Sarah and Carla and Mustafa are going to be able, I think, to give us a few hints too on how they selected, because you may at this point, right, have a few people that you might go to with regard to your referees. But I think definitely one from your supervisor is usually, because again, that can depend, but I will say probably 99% of the time there's a letter from the referee, and then people, not surprisingly, will go to their master's supervisor. Sometimes it can be hard, right, because you haven't started your PhD, and I saw some people there as well, so they may not know you as well, the PhD supervisor, so that's why it might be the master's, and that's why I'm saying it's not, there's still different circumstances for why that is, but all of that to say that that usually it's going to be from your at more graduate school level. I did not, in my experience, see an undergraduate thesis like a letter from the supervisor. If you worked in a lab, that would be another person that perhaps might write a letter. Again, usually it's related to your research. Sarah, I don't know, do we want to ask from the students now, Nancy, do you think, about their referee, like just these classic referees, and then we'll talk about the leadership one?
Yeah.
I mean, I will say too, like, as a supervisor, like, is it helpful for me to I don't know, might not know all the things that you've done, right? And I suspect Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa are going to talk about maybe how they helped people write their letters, because, and that's in a number of different ways sometimes, but how do you help make sure that those letters are, because they're still meant to be confidential. They don't need to share the full letter with you. That's not actually appropriate. Usually I will ask my students for input and that kind of thing, but I don't share the final letter. And Nancy may have a different approach, but that's usually the way I am. Maybe we'll start with Mustafa this time.
Sure. So, like you said, there are 2 referees in the academic reference section. So the first one was definitely my PhD supervisor. That's a given. I think everyone has to put that in. So what I did was my supervisor knows about the Vanier, so I didn't need to provide him much information about what the scholarship actually is. But what I did was I sent him a bullet points of everything that I saw that could be included and strengthen my my reference letter. I provided information about myself and things that, whether he knew or not, I felt like I needed to reiterate it with him. He then read all of that and asked me to provide a draft or a rough draft of what I think should look like the reference letter, and then he took that and edited on it, and I did not see the final product. The other supervisor was one of the postdoctors that I worked with in our department. He knew me on a personal level, so he did the same thing. He did not know much about the Vanier like my supervisor did, so that's where I had to provide more information about the scholarship itself, so he would know what to write, what to include, what are the reviewers looking for when they're reading these reference letters. And yeah, like I did not see, like you said, the final products on country of the leadership references, where I'm the one who provides them in my application. So I've seen the final product of those, but for the academic referees, I did not know the final product. So.
Sarah, do you want to talk about your letters?
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. So you need, essentially at the end of the day, you need 4 references. You need 2 academic referee assessments and 2 letters. That's 4 people. At first that kind of overwhelmed me because I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know 4 people that well. But I ended up being able to get 2 people who worked with me in the lab, so 2 mentors. And then I ended up getting people who I worked with outside of the lab in respect to conferences and the conferences I was planning. So you have to contact these people really far in advance. And the reason I say that is everyone's different. A lot of people want you to write it for them, and then they'll edit it. So I actually had to write 3 of them. And it's kind of hard because you have to figure out what you want each person to say. So basically I ended up, what I did to each of them is I sent them my CV, my transcripts, my evaluation criteria form, and the reference package. So that would help them. And then I outlined exactly what I wanted them to say. I also ended up writing things that, well, I had to write 3 different reference letters. So it was kind of like the same thing, but in different ways. So I tried to view it from their perspective of how they would view me as a leader, and make sure that you provide examples from that. And then the people who do want to write their own, make sure that you give them exactly what you want to say. Like say, I hope that you can touch on me being a leadership in this way. These are key words that I would like you to say, and maybe just have a conversation with them. That's kind of how it went with me. I gave them about several weeks. Obviously, none of them, well, all of them wanted me to do it except one. And usually they ask for your feedback anyways, and they'll talk to you and ask questions. So just be prepared for it to be a conversation, because sometimes they'll see something on your CCV and say, oh, I didn't know you do this. Can you explain a little more? And that's actually really good, because then you get feedback on your CCV and say, okay, maybe I should include a little bit more information in that section so that it is more clear to the reviewers. And so I guess the major key tip that I have for this is just to give some time and really look at that evaluation, because you'll get those key words to actually use when you write it.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Exactly. Carlo?
Yes, I don't have too much to add. I think Mustafa and Sarah, they did a great job in explaining everything I did too. So I guess one point I would like to emphasize on is the necessity to send your CV to your referee. So you want to make sure that they know your CV, that they know what you already talked about, because you don't want discrepancies, right, in terms of how they describe certain things that you have done in the past, right? So you really want to make sure that the entire application package that you're submitted to McMaster and then hopefully to the Vanier competition is coherent. So you don't have things that are like, that person says that, but the other person says something very different. So yeah, so you really have to make sure you work on this. So in terms of my academic referees, I did not know anything that they wrote about me. So what I said, I just sent them my CV, I sent them my application, and I sent them to emphasize on the impact of my actions, like the impacts of my academic endeavors, the impact of my other things that can be well seen regarded in academia. So that's what they did, I guess, and then they sent it. So I had no idea what they really wrote at the end. I don't know. But in terms of the other referees, which is two other referees, so that was a very difficult process though, because for example, I asked for a French person to write a reference letter for me. And in the French environment, especially in France and Europe, people don't brag too much about others. I put it very plainly. It's very difficult because it's not necessarily something which is in the culture. Like they're just gonna say, okay, I work with that person, that work was excellent, that. So it's just 2 sentences. And then you're like, this is not a reference letter from a Canadian perspective. It's just like, if you write something like this and I submit it, I'm done. I'm not going to get the Vanier. So I had to go and then talk to my French referee on the phone several times, explain the process, send all the link of, the Vanier application website in order for them to see what is going to be evaluated, in order to see all the criteria. I really had to go and then follow up on that. Okay, and then so they sent me a first version. I said, it's interesting, but it's not really tackling the criteria that Vanier is going to be evaluating. Can you, based on what you have written, tap into this particular criterion, for example? That would be interesting. So how can you write it in much more impactful way? So I think this is, as I said, it takes a lot of time. I really recommend contacting those people at least 2 months in advance. So you make sure that those people, they know they're going to write about it. So when you ask them, they're not surprised. They're not like, oh, okay, I have to do that very quickly. Okay. And they write 2 or 3 sentences. And at the end of the day, this is not what is required, because the letter should be comprehensive, should be quite holistic about your leadership experience as a person. So yeah, that's all I can add.
Yeah, and I think the point about, so sometimes people do have international letters, and they do look and feel differently. I will say that at the level of the national committee, and we do take that into account. But I think the advice that you got today around that is just how important it is to help coach if you are seeking a letter from an international supervisor, that it's important that, there's a process there. Again, being mindful that you're, not writing the letter for them you're assisting or taking the liberty of suggesting some key points that they want to make, but you have to be very, very careful, right? Because at the end of the day, it's their signature that goes on that. So it's not you signing it, it's not you. So what they do with whatever information you give ultimately is up to them at the end of the day. But I think that's just a really important point. But I will say that we do take into consideration, it's an international letter. I won't say, oh, we make a generalization, all French people write really short letters or anything like that. That's not, but we do consider, we just consider the context from where it's coming from, and that it might be different when it comes to letters. But I think this idea of helping coach is an important one. I think just talking about I think we've talked about the leadership reference letters, but I don't know if Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa, if you want to say anything else, Nancy, at that.
I think I might add just one thing. When choosing the referees, the 4 of them actually, I chose people that I have a good personal relationship with, so that I would be able to communicate with them my feedback on the letters when they provide me with the drafts, if they choose to do so. So for the leadership letters, I chose my master supervisor, because he was the same as my undergrad graduation project supervisor, and the academic advisor of the student activity where I worked at the time. So these people are both young, they're in early 30s, and that helped me greatly, being able to provide feedback when they write things, for example, that I needed to remove, or things that I wanted to emphasize more on. They would be more open to feedback and more open to rewrite things with me and work with me a little bit on this, other than, for example, choosing my PhD supervisor or someone who's like the chair department or so. These people don't have much time to, in their perspective, waste on your application. So So choosing a kind of people that you can have a conversation with, like Carlos said, talk on the phone, tell them I need more of that, I need less of this, is a very important thing to choose from. So.
Yeah, I will say, like, as a supervisor, you know, I understand that I'm busy, but I see this as part of my job. Some people, and I take pleasure, actually. It's one of the, I don't know, maybe I'm a like nerd like that, but I will say, I would hate that somebody's not approaching me because I think I'm too busy. This is part of my job. So I just think that's important. But Mustafa, to the point that it's somebody that's likely to give you a good reference, is important. And I remember approaching somebody and afterwards thinking, I actually ended up sort of saying, oh, I found somebody else after that conversation, to be perfectly honest, because all of a sudden I was like, I'm not sure that we're on the same page in terms of the reference that they might provide. So not to say that I'm like a bad person and there's a bad side to me, but I got the impression that they weren't going to invest in the way that I thought a little bit in terms of the letter. So I think I think you made some good points. I think was there something else? Oh, I did find sometimes with the leadership, like, and people did contextualize, like there was one person that asked somebody to write a letter and the person put at the start, you know, I'm traveling and that's why this letter is on an email template. So they kind of like, it still should look official, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So a leadership letter is better if it's on, better, that's probably not the right word. I guess it's just really important that it's formal. And even though it's on the leadership side, and it may not have the heading, but the point is that it reads like a formal letter. This is not a friend writing on your behalf. And that's my point that I'm trying to emphasize when we review the leadership reference letter. I think somebody is asking about if it's written in a foreign language. The expectation is French or English, because those are the official languages in Canada. We do have French reviewers, but we don't have reviewers in other languages. So I never saw a letter in another language at my level.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah,
The final tips.
Final tips, which
So
yeah.
I was just going to say something. You know, kind of my final tip is that I know this has been, you know, there's a lot in this presentation and there's a lot of things to do. I don't want you to be like Mustafa's two friends and decide not to go forward, because we want McMaster to have successful Banting or successful Vanier winners. 6 to 10 to maybe 12 of you who are on this call may get this award, and 3 people are here and they went through a lot of work. But it is so worthwhile to do this, and your supervisors and your faculty and the people you work with want you to do this and will support you. And when you get to the McMaster review level, we will support you to make it better. And don't, it is tough, but it's going to help shape up your research proposal. It's going to, you know, I think all the students talked about how going through this process did help. We don't want you to be discouraged right now because this is big, but it is this is the big award and we want you to get it. And some of you are going to get this. And the reviewers know that this is an award for people starting their PhD. So if you don't feel you have to have all the big things that your supervisor has, or you don't have, you know, 10, 20 publications, or you don't have all this, the reviewers understand this. But if you have contributed and if you've led and contributed and you've done your research and you have academic excellence, you know, you can get this award. We don't want you to be discouraged. We want you to apply and go forward with this application. That's all.
Yeah, and if you're from, you know, a Black, Indigenous, people of color community, I strongly encourage you to apply for this award. I think it's really important that we grow the diversity of our award of our awards, and I think particularly our, you know, the agencies are paying attention to that, and our graduate community. So I think you know, somebody had asked earlier about would that go in the leadership? Would that go, you know, where does that go? I guess I don't know whether any of you weave that in at all in terms of as part of your leadership or some of the roles that you've had in the community. Did any of you do that?
Yes, I did. I did, and you know, and I'm gonna be talking to those students too. those BIPOC students, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Most of the time, I feel like we're afraid of those things, of those bigger words because of international internalized racism. So we really feel like those are things that we're not going to be able to achieve. We're not going to be able to reach. We need to be extra exceptional to be able to get to those levels. And I really want to emphasize on what was just said. Those are things that are reachable. Those are things that are accessible to us too. Those are things that we can do. Again, the application, and I'm so glad that that was just said. It's not expected for you to be at the end of your PhD, to have everything figured out and to know exactly the impact you're going to be doing at the end of your career. You're just a first-year PhD student or just a second-year PhD student. So you're not expected to do more than that. So I think it's really important to just leave all this fear out and to see the world as something which is accessible to you too. That's my approach to scholarships. I never really doubted myself in that sense, even though it doesn't depend on me to get the scholarship, right? So I do everything I can. I write a good application, I ask for feedback, and I take into consideration. And the final result is up to the committee. It's not up to me at all. I don't have no power on that after I submit my application. However, everything I can do to put myself in the good mindset to really write a compelling application that is going to stand out among all the brilliant people who apply, I do it. So one of the ways that I prepare myself into getting into this is to leave fear out, is to leave all of those internalized, very negative thoughts about our value, our worth, whether we're good enough as people of color students. All of that, I really try to, shut down this noise, because at the end it's noise. So what really matters is what I do. What really matters is what my application is, what my research is, and what my contribution to the academic world is. So in terms of how I use the particular equity statement in my leadership statement, as a Black person, I mean, I'm visibly Black. so there is no way to hide it. I'm not gonna pretend, oh yeah, I'm not. So one way that I talk about it, I don't make it the center of my application, because my goal is not to do research on myself. My goal is to do research, in my case, in the social sciences, about the integration of immigrants in Canada in comparison to immigrants in France. So it's not my own life that I'm studying, it's the way I'm studying, another group of people with different issues, with people who didn't have access to the same thing as me. However, because of my own positionality as a Black person who has lived in several Western countries before coming to Canada, so one thing that I really make sure that I emphasize is how my own experience as a Black person, who some people might see as if migrant myself, how that informs my own understanding of migration issues, my own understanding of integration issues, and how I frame all of that in my leadership statement and also in my Canadian Commons CV. So I think that's the way. So don't put your race, gender, ethnicity, or whatever at the center of your application, because at the end, it's not a study about you. Unless it is. But if it's not a study about you, really focus on what your study is about, and then how your own positionality, the numerous intersections that you have, contribute to a better understanding of your own study and contribute to a bigger, right, contribution to academia. So that's why I advise. So don't be afraid. That's my advice. And my email is going to be available for people who feel like they need to talk afterwards. I'm quite generous with mentoring other BIPOC students. So if you want to reach out, I'm happy to have a call. I'm happy to talk, and I'm happy to assist whatever way I can.
If I may add on what Carter said, like, he's absolutely correct about the things that we should do. And the way I also approach it is I always jump in heads first, no questions asked, as they say. That's what I do in this kind of situation. So for example, when I first came to Canada for my PhD, I applied for the NSERC, the PGSD scholarship, and I didn't get it. And then the process itself was heavy. And then that didn't stop me from applying the following year on the NSERC and the Vanier. And that's what I did. And I got both, alhamdulillah. So that's like doing that at the time. It's very important to keep going, not to be hindered by the setbacks of whether rejections, very strong revisions of feedback on everything you do, but always focus on your capabilities and what you actually can do instead of anything else. In respect to the Inclusion Act, I did not state anything except, of course, where I came from or what experiences and where they were. And the only thing that took me aback a little bit was in the application at the final stage when they ask you, are you from a visible minority group? And that was like that was a little bit intimidating. I didn't know why that question was being asked at the time, but I answered it, and I said yes, and that was all that included the being from a different race kind of thing in all of my processes. So
yeah, and it's really, I can tell you, so I'm co-chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and so it's really important. And we're talking about this, about applicants, who's applying for our awards, and of course trying to understand who's applying, but and not just who's getting. We seem to track who's getting, but it's just as important to find out who's applying. And so that question would have come from the federal government, and sometimes some of the questions that are asked about BIPOC are framed in that way are a bit awkward, right? To try to understand what community people are representing or coming from. So but thanks for, yeah. And of course, you don't have to answer that question. There is that opportunity, right, to do that. So Sarah, I don't know if you have anything to add as well.
Honestly, I'm not quite sure what more to add. Like, I have a lot of respect for Carlo and Mustafa. It's kind of difficult, as I am not from a minority group. My parents were immigrants, and I moved here when I was really young, I was a year old when they moved here. But I'm not a minority in any way, but that doesn't mean that I don't practice equity, inclusion, and diversity in my everyday life. But I don't know what more to add other than it's something that you should include in your leadership statement as well, because the school looks for it, and just adding something along those lines really does show you what kind of person you are. So these statements aren't just about how your leadership. You want to really show them the type of person you are in a written document, and that's kind of hard to do, but it's just think of it as try to be tone. You try to think about your tone and how you speak, and with that, I think that you'll be able to create a really good application.
Yeah, so there's a few questions in the kind of remaining questions in the Q&A, and I think they're just like, where do you explain the impact of the research or contribution in the leadership statement? Rather, I'm not quite sure that question, but I think the notion of your research should be in your research, but it's not a surprise sometimes where you see that overlap, right? But there are people that have very distinct leadership roles that have nothing to do with their research, right? So I've read about people volunteering in palliative care, but their research is over here on like something completely different, right? And that's just an example. But that's, you know, it doesn't have to be related to your research.
But they should be distinct in that I have seen people talk too much about their research and the proposal in there, and how it is new and novel in their leadership statement, and they should be apart. Yeah.
Maybe maybe the applications I see have already had that feedback, but I really do. At the level that I'm reading, I see they are distinct, and I don't often see a lot about the research on the leadership side.
There's a question about volunteer experience at a university is non-academic experience. Yeah, so that's part of your leadership. Leadership roles within the university are part of that, right? So people take on different roles at universities. They lead organizations or clubs or do different things, or may take some leadership roles within the school that are different than like a TA. So that all counts as part of your leadership. Yeah.
Carlo, were you going to say something?
Yes. I was going to add for the impact of your research, because this is a very important part of the application. So you have 3 documents. You have your research proposal, you have your leadership statement, but also you have a research contribution section. I don't know if this year it's still part of it, but the year I applied last year, it was part of it. So in that research contribution section, you have the opportunity to talk about 5 things that you have done in the past, research related, not other non-academic things, that have made some contributions in your field. So this is one, that document specifically, I really took it seriously and put all my impact, like what I conceive as impact on my research community on that document. So for example, one of the things I said was, I worked at a research center when I was doing my master's, and that research center allowed me to be in touch with people, and then that led me to co-edit a special issue, blah, 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 and that has impact on my particular field because a special issue talks about a specific issue that hasn't been talked about in the field yet, right? So those are the things that you can frame, right, in your research contribution page. And I think if there is one perfect document to do that, without taking too much space to explain what your research is about or to explain your academic leadership statement and non-academic leadership statement, is that document. It's just one page. You can put everything you want to put there in terms of impact.
If I may add, like I had a different format than what Carlo just said in the contributions page. So for the NSERC, you choose a minimum of 3 publications or activities you did in the academic section, and then emphasize on the impact. So 3 was all I had. So in the first year when I applied and got rejected, I included things like my master thesis, some projects that I did in my undergrad or my grad courses, and I end up realizing that that is not what you're actually looking for. So for the contribution, when I reapplied for the NSERC and applied for the first time for the Bernier, I chose for example, the journal paper that I submitted, the conference paper, and the conference presentation that I did. These are my 3 research contributions. And for each one, I would explain why is this important? Why is the research I did in that paper, for example, presentations, impactful? What is the output of it, and so forth? So and these were all I had. Like I'm thankful that the bare minimum was 3, because that's literally everything I had. So I included everything. Like I tried to emphasize on the output of these research items in the contributions page.
Yeah, Sarah, were you going to say something or address?
I saw a comment in the Q&A. One of the questions was, may you ask the previous student about their recommendation on what part of the application they recommend to start? And I saw that someone responded after, and I agree. I think you should start with or Nancy responded after. You should start with your leadership statement. I actually think you should start with your CCV first, just so that you have everything that you want to talk about all written out. You know everything you've done. You've gone back in time. You've highlighted the most important things. And then you would go on to your leadership statement and trying to explain why this is relevant and how this has made you a leader today, and basically why you deserve the award. And then going on to everything else. I guess one step back, you also need to contact your faculty chair to see what you actually need to do to begin the process. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think I like when there's no open questions anymore. Wow, they've magically disappeared, Diane and Tony, but you know what, your questions were great, and I think this format's going to be great as well. I think for I'm glad it's being captured and recorded. So I will say, and maybe just to the next slide is to say thank you. And I think we had a few thank yous already to Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa. So it really brings to, I think what happens with this presentation is that when Nancy and I can tell you what's happening behind the scenes from a reviewer perspective and at a faculty level, but I think Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa help bring to life how, or to highlight how you or I guess I don't want to use the same word, but how you bring your best self and present your best self and your experiences in a way that fits the award. So going back to the criteria, and I think that was said at the very start, read the application, read the slides here, but the slides that are on this presentation are still an interpretation from the website. So you want to go back to the original Vanier website, the primary source, and read what's asked. Because I will say when I think Mustafa said he got 8.5, right? So it's not out of 10, it's actually out of 9. And then there's like this criteria, right, around how people are given and scored as well. So I think you know, to go back and look at the criteria even to know how things are considered and graded. So all of that to say, thank you everybody for your thoughtful questions, and to special thanks to Sarah, Carlo, and Mustafa as well for participating. Of course, we say to Diane and Tony, thank you as well for bringing us all together and helping to organize the session. Tony and Diane, I don't know if you have any closing comments.
Thank you, Brenda. I do just a couple of quick things. I'd like to pass on, I guess, on behalf of Tony and myself for Grad Studies to the entire panel. We appreciate all your valuable insight from behind and in front of the scenes. It's greatly appreciated. I know the students will benefit, or the new applicants will truly benefit from it. Just a reminder that the presentation is recorded and will go up on our website, as will the slide presentation. And I don't believe we actually have it on here, but I will put a link before I post the slideshow to our Vanier website. And all the documents for application are there, all your checklists, everything is there for you. So if you don't have an answer that you can't find there, contact either myself or Tony in Grad Studies.
I'd like to thank the panel and Brenda and Nancy as well. That was great.
So we want McMaster to have the most winners,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, do it.
And you're leaving, and you're going to have a Vanier application. Nancy's looking forward to reviewing it.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to stepping out of the room when they say a McMaster application is up, because I want to see lots. I want to be stepping out of the room a ton of times, because the University of Toronto steps out of the room about 1,000 times, and I can't tell you how much that grinds on Parminder and I at the CIHR level. Of course, they're much larger institutions, so there's reasons for that, but it's quality, right? So, so please let us meet our quota, and let's do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Someone's got to get these awards. We want it to be you. So
Right.
do it.
Right.
Okay, everybody, take care. Be safe.
Thank you so much,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.